You talked earlier about how each airport has got its own DNA, its own USP. Would it be fair to say that your platform is very much tailor-made to each individual airport? There's no kind of one-size-fits-all solution, and of course it's quite costly as an exercise. The next question is going to be, is the resource in the airports up to speed with what is required to deliver this platform?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, it was a few questions. So, first question. We've designed it as a suite, yeah. So we're calling it the OM3 suite. Suite for us means it's a collection of solutions that you can plug and play, and each of those can be customized to that airport specific business requirements. So of course you have a lot of common ground, such as order management, logistics, payment, product information management, search, recommendation, all of that sort of stuff. Those are all individual solutions inside of OM3. However, the airport, of course, wants their own unique user experience in the front end. They want their own workflows. They want their own locations. They have their own layout of the airport. Sometimes they already have solutions in place. Like, for example, with Heathrow, they had a loyalty system, so we integrated with it in real time. Whereas Frankfurt didn't have one, so we built it to be integrated with the platform. So we can use the facilities the airport already has. We don't need to do a rip and replace, which is something a lot of airports would be afraid of. And we integrate it into the ecosystem of the airport. As it comes to cost, of course, some airports underestimate the cost of what it takes to roll out a solution, integrate it with 30 plus retailers and all of their systems, which are often legacy, which are often not fully real time and so on, plus integrated with the flight information system, the loyalty system, the CRM, the BI, and whatever other systems might be in place at that airport. However, if you do it right, the return of investment can be quite accelerated. So, for example, in Heathrow, we're going to see the return of investment of the first release of the platform already within 12 months. And this is, of course, based on the maturity that airport already has in communicating to their passengers. If you're starting with zero, that ROI takes longer, but if you're starting somewhere, that ROI can be strongly accelerated.
So, I mean, where have the barriers been? Where have your challenges been? Is it because that many of the internal resource within airports, especially IT, get upset because the idea wasn't invented there, and maybe they haven't got the far-reaching experience that's required to deliver this, and therefore construct barriers? Or is it because there's a lack of vision amongst airports because they think the cost is too high? Based on what you've said from Heathrow's ROI, from a lot of developed airports, that's a no-brainer. A one-year return is a no-brainer. 7 or 8 years they think about, but the reasonable term would say be 3 years for a medium-sized airport, not the size of Heathrow. Would that be fair?
We typically, we calculate the ROI based on a couple of numbers that are pretty consistent across airports. It's how many visitors do you have to your websites and app, how many passengers do you have overall, how many transactions are you already doing potentially on parking and things like that. From that we can interpolate how many transactions we can generate. Once you do that, and once you look at what is actually the brand mix, what is the retail spend average, we can figure out what the most likely average basket value will be online. And from that we can calculate the ROI. From what we have seen is if it's an airport between 30-40 million, the ROI is typically within 3 years or less. If it's a smaller airport, it can be 5 years as well. But one thing that is not even considered in these ROI calculations is what can you as an airport do to acquire more traffic onto your platform? Do you have maybe a hub airline which has stopped doing in-flight duty-free and is willing to do an integration where they get a small kickback of commission, and in return in every email they send for check-in and check-in reminders, etc., they actually promote your platform? That's when we have been seeing like massive results and conversion rates that are much better than what you can get from an airport website visitor which really just wanted to look at the flight information and then kind of stumbled across the airport is now also doing an e-commerce.
Well, if it's incremental income for an airline that doesn't do duty-free, it's almost a no-brainer if they're getting
You would
a
think
deal.
so.
Well, yeah, arguably, yes, it should be. But I mean, this business is slow to move. I mean, and it takes us logically to the next point where, do you feel that, compared to the domestic market, and the major online operators, that the business, the travel retail business, the airport business in particular, is significantly behind. We almost act like dinosaurs because the marketplace has been so cocooned for such a very long time. I mean, how can they harness the technology quicker and buy into what you're offering?
Yeah. I would say, as a previous outsider to the industry, I noticed quite early that the travel retail industry is really a protected bubble to some extent. Spend per passenger is dropping almost everywhere across the board, whether it's in-flight, whether it's at the airports, except for a few major hubs that are still seeing increases in spend per passenger. But it's all been cushioned by the fact that we have massive passenger growth globally. And even if a geopolitical event causes one airport to suffer, it always causes a few others to benefit. So overall, as an industry, the industry has been growing, but it has been far behind its potential. Just to give you an idea, the average spend per passenger on a global scale was only about $8 to $9 in 2017. That same passenger roughly spent $580 on e-commerce elsewhere and more than $6,000 in retail elsewhere. So that is kind of the pie that we're talking about, that we're targeting. And of course, with the airports always and the retailers always having considered purchasing at an airport a impulse purchase, and that is actually declining significantly, opening up to the idea, hey, people are actually planning what to buy, so let us help them what to buy before they come to the airport, weeks before, days before, hours before. It opens a completely new arena for them.
So the golden hour becomes a golden week or month.
Exactly. However, of course, a lot of passengers are not aware of that possibility yet. So this is what has been our challenge is, if we were live at all airports, we would see huge sales across the entire ecosystem. But because we are still pioneering, if you ask passengers, 50 million passengers at an airport, probably only 1% of them will even know that the airport offers such a service now.
And I guess most of the airports you're speaking to are operating a wait-and-see policy. But certainly the figures from Heathrow and the growing figures from Auckland and Frankfurt should tip them into a conversation piece with you that's actually more robust, more meaningful. Perhaps when online retail sucks up 20-25% of the airport business and it's directly seen to be cannibalizing it, there might just be a serious wake-up call, but then it's almost too late. And 75% of the remaining business ain't enough, given the demands of infrastructure and so on from airports.
Look, I think of course it's one way to secure retail sales. But what you have to keep in mind is that what we are building for these airports is not just another channel to sell. It's actually a way to know the passengers for the first time. And this is absolutely crucial. I strongly believe that advertisers will be less and less willing to spend for billboards that are not personalized at an airport. They will be much more interested to speak to 200 passengers that have shown a certain behavior, that fly in a certain class to a certain destination, and market to them directly. So as an airport, to accumulate that sort of data will be much more valuable than the concession fees that you can generate from incremental sales to these passengers. And so really, and this brings me kind of back to the point that you asked earlier about, are the airports ready for it? Many of them are not yet, and they have to build this know-how internally, because in the end, an e-commerce is no autoplay kind of thing whatsoever. It's something that needs attention, it needs to be fostered, it needs to be marketed. You need to look at how can I personalize to my passengers, how can I market to my passengers, what promotions work with which groups, and of course the potential that you have where I can send a very targeted message to only 50 of my passengers and I will get a conversion rate of 30% because it's so targeted is completely different from these mass activations that you see in retail stores that only works for a tiny fraction of the passengers running through that store.
So it's narrowcast with less wastage, effectively.
Yeah.